That was really interesting to just see the, I think, really nice diversity of the ways in which we have across the industry use personas. I mean, there's no one right way to do it. Every organization needs to find their own path. But before we talk a bit more about the method, and I'm sure you all have questions. I've already thought of a few questions around the, sort of practitioner side of things. But before we do that, let's try this role play. We take a moment if you need, do your mask. I should mention, actually, as I was preparing for this, I learned that the word persona is, the root of the term refers to the mask that one would wear during performance. So it is a bit of a device as far as, sort of that acting and channeling and empathy, for sure. So, okay, so let's ask our undergraduate, graduate, and postdoc some questions that you might want to ask a panel of users if these folks were indeed a registered undergraduate student, graduate student, postdoc. I'm going to kick us off because we've got a couple of questions just to get the ball rolling. So start to think. We've got a mic here. What might you ask if you had a panel of these kinds of users at your disposal this afternoon? One thing that comes to my mind is, pronounce her name. Hermione. Hermione. Okay, see, I don't know Harry Potter. I know. I'm just grateful you still like me. But Hermione, tell me how the library fits into your process of conducting research and doing your work.
Well, the library is a very important quiet space for me. While I have both the books that I have to purchase for the classes that, as I mentioned, I have read before the year even begins, the library is a really important place if I want to go above and beyond in an assignment. That's where I get the resources to do that.
Excellent. And Jessie, what about you? Are there library services or resources that you were surprised to learn about?
Yes. Well, I was surprised to learn that there were these expert librarians. I thought all librarians were the same and that they were just, like at the circulation desk. So it was a big surprise to me to learn that there was I'm a food studies master's student, and there's actually a food studies librarian. So that was not something I had any idea about when I entered my program.
Very nice. Very nice. And Beth, what about you? Are there personal coping mechanisms around literature overload? Does the library play into that, or are there other techniques you're using to cope with overload?
I certainly rely on librarians to help me most readily find and access the best information I need, so to help me sift. But in addition, I find that my social networks within the scientific research realm are incredibly valuable. So that's my mentors, my peers, and also, just other collaborators at other labs who are pointing me in the right direction to shape my research.
And when you find research that matters to you, what's your preferred mode of reading that? Are you downloading a PDF? Are you reading it on screen? How does that go for you?
I like to save PDF files into a meticulous folder structure that I have on my desktop. But for reading them, I print them out.
All right, very good. Jessie, tell me, you mentioned that you were surprised by things like specialty librarians, but is that, are there things that you wished you had known about the library at the beginning of the program, or is there sort of librarian advice about the library that you might give to new students coming into the program?
Sure, absolutely. There are a couple big things that I would tell somebody starting out, and one is you really have to stake your claim on like a locker or a carrel if you want it. Space is scarce. Real estate everywhere is at a premium. So the library offers these great services where you can kind of have some reserved space, but you might end up on a really long waiting list if you don't get in there right away. even a library as rich in resources as ours. And secondly, I would say that learning that there is something beyond that first search box on the library's website is so helpful. I mean, I get a lot of what I need just by Googling and Wikipedia and going to the basic search, but sometimes it's not everything, or I can't find, like, I'll have a citation from my professor that I can only find by digging a little bit deeper, and I would never have done that on my own, you know, so going to some of the classes and talking to librarians helped me learn how to go a little bit deeper, so really take the time to do that.
Excellent. I hope Hermione was listening to you, because she'll be a graduate student, sure. Soon, right?
Can I also answer that question?
Yeah, please.
I wish that I had known when I started that the librarian is not the terrifying figure that the school rumors paint her to be. Most students are really afraid of the librarian, partially because she comes off as really mean, and we're afraid that we're going to be told not to make noise or not to eat in the library. But the truth is that if we'd gotten to know the librarian a little bit better, she might have led us into the haunted book section, because there are a lot of resources available at the library that only the librarian knows how to access. So making friends with the librarian can really be a bonus.
Excellent. Questions from the audience for our panel? Our undergraduate, our graduate student, or our postdoc? Come on, how many times a day do you get to talk to our end users directly, or them being channeled through the bodies of others?
So what action do you take if you've hit a paywall or you can't get access to an article that looks interesting?
Really good question. Should we have everybody
Yeah.
respond to that one? Yeah? Do you want to start, Beth?
Sure. Great question. I hate it when that happens. The first thing I do is I call my librarian, because they often can answer questions about why, for instance, we don't have access. Could we get access to this content? Is it just something, was I on my mobile phone and not on the institution network? Or do we simply not have access? If that fails, then I might reach out to my network to see whether anybody else has access to this paper and could maybe help me get access to it. And beyond that, I might start to raise complaints in various online and social forums.
So one of the workshops that I took at the library taught me this really cool thing, where I can go into Google Scholar, I don't know if any of you have done this, and have an account, like if you sign in, and then you can tell it in the settings what institution you're affiliated with. So if I search for if I find something that it looks like it's behind a paywall, I copy and paste the citation into Google Scholar, and then I see if I can click through to my library's, I guess, whatever subscription it is. And that works a lot. And if that doesn't work, then I might try it, like I said, in the general library search. I might go there next. And if that doesn't work, I usually would I learned about interlibrary loan, and it's really fast for articles. So I have used that a few times too. So I've been pretty lucky.
I will ask the librarian, but I know for a fact that Neville will Google it and Ron will just give up.
Would any of you, Hermione, Jesse, or Beth, would any of you go to Twitter and use the iHasPDF hashtag, or try any other methods of requesting directly?
That's against the rules.
It's against the rules, okay. No for Hermione. Jesse, would that appeal to you?
I'm not, I kind of left Twitter for Instagram a little bit ago.
Okay, I hear
So
ya.
no.
So no. Beth, is that something you might use?
I'm not that transgressive.
Okay, understood.
A lot of rule followers up here.
Yeah, we have some really nice users here. John, you have a question?
Yes, I wonder if any of you think back over the last couple of weeks, like in the work you were doing, and just, was there a moment like you were just like completely enthralled with what you were doing? Like you even didn't know it's dinner time or whatever else, you were just so involved and engaged. And just tell me what was going on, what were tools were you using, what got you into that state?
Anybody have flow in their work lately?
Well, John, I don't know if you know this, but in the third or fourth book, I actually had to get something to manipulate time because there was so much schoolwork that I wanted to do that I literally didn't have all the time that I needed to do it. So yes, I would say that happens frequently. I would say that it also doesn't depend on a single platform or a single product. It has everything to do with what I'm studying, the content that I'm motivated to study.
Yeah, so I'm a food studies master's student, as I mentioned, and I volunteer at a community garden, and I happened to find an article about community gardens as interventions for like food deserts in urban areas. And it was so exciting because it was the first time that I had this connection between like what I do in my spare time and my academic work, which is not always there. So sometimes I wonder, like, what's the point? And that made me feel like maybe there is a purpose, or maybe I'm getting this degree for a reason and not just to go bankrupt. So.
And as you know, I love frogs. So my favorite time of year is the springtime when the peepers are out. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of hearing them at night. But it's a real treat, and I really love doing field research during that time. But my problem is, or my challenge right now, is that I do have aging parents at home, so that does limit my ability to go out and do extensive field research right now.
I think that kind of human detail is so valuable, is so powerful. That's great. I love that. Other questions for Jessie, Hermione? Yeah, please. Come on up.
Hi. It's a great panel with different levels of study experience. So I have two questions. The first one is, how do you find a research project and then start this project for yourself? And the second one is, have you heard about open access publishing?
Great question. Who wants to kick us off?
All my ideas so far have really come through my advisor. I mean, we talk about them, so my advisor has given me a lot of advice and tips on what I might pursue, and I've had ideas of my own too that my advisor has really helped me either, figure out how to pursue or maybe try to do later. And I guess I've heard, like, I know in the library there was an event, I think, at one point about open access, but I was really busy that week, and I don't really know, but the term is vaguely familiar.
So because I'm still in the beginning of some of my more advanced coursework, the majority of my research topics are prescribed. When there is a range of topics that I can choose from, I will choose the topic that I care the most about, because I know that research is the most engaging and goes the best when it's something that I care very deeply about. Ron will choose whatever he thinks is easiest, and when he says easiest, he means there's going to be the most information on it because he doesn't have to work as hard to find the information, but then he ends up in really big trouble and I have to bail him out.
It's a great question. So in terms of choosing my next research project, passion and interest play a role, but I'm at the point now where, like, I would like to take my career to where I can have my own lab. And so that means actually kind of identifying areas in which my research can make a real notable difference and have a measurable impact that I can then use to further my career in terms of securing that kind of head of lab position. So the interest and passion play a role, but there's also kind of a strategic assessment of where are gaps in the research, where can I build on my strengths in order to get me to where I want to go. And as for open access, as kind of a conservationist, I think the two go hand in hand. It's really important that research be broadly accessible to all. But I also have a hard time getting over the charges that authors have to pay for open access, especially coming from a relatively small lab with not a lot of funding right now. So in principle, I love it. Practically, I feel like we need to get to a better place in terms of supporting it.
I have no idea what open access is, and neither does Ron.
Other questions? Yeah.
Two-parter. How are you finding or discovering research articles in your field? And then when you have them, how are you consuming them? Are you reading them start to finish? Are you picking through it? Or are you just reading the abstract, the figures?
So, the first part was how you find how you find?
Discover, yeah.
So I start with I often do searches on PubMed. I have alerts that I subscribe to from various journals that I read regularly. I'm part of a journal club at my institution, so that's a really good way to stay on top of things. And also attending the conferences that are really big in my field are just a good way to stay on top of things. And for reading, so to select what I read, I basically look at the author list, the title, and the abstract. And then when I know I want to read it, I save it to my meticulously organized file system and print out the PDF.
So I don't have a field yet. I'm working on it. I've thought extensively about it, and I'm working toward a number of different options. I've been told I have a lot of potential in several different subjects, so I'm considering all of them. But for right now, I mostly have topics for assignments. I do a lot of research for those research topics, and I will admit in exploring my future career options, I've looked for articles in those fields as well. I search for them. I ask the librarian for support in searching for them. I not only use the search box on the library website. I don't know if Hogwarts has one of those, but I'm also, because I've worked with the librarian and asked her specific questions, because I'm interested in learning more about what my future career might be, I know what some of the resources are that aren't directly accessible via that search box. So I have a pretty good idea of how to use the library website. When I'm consuming those articles, I'm reading the entirety of each one. Sometimes I print them out, sometimes I read them on the device, but the way I consume information is to highlight, is to take notes in the margins, to engage with that way. Sometimes I'm using sticky notes. Ron and Harry are on the Quidditch team. They're very busy. Work takes me less time than it takes them. They're slower readers than I am, and that is not, to use your words, that is not a value judgment. But they work more slowly than I do. So when I see them working, I see them often, they are just using that library search box. They are reading the abstract of each article and then maybe skimming and scanning the rest of the article. They have Quidditch games to go to. We all have lives to save. So we have some competing priorities when it comes to engaging with that content. So I see them using efficiency-seeking strategies when engaging with that content. But I read the whole thing.
So you know what's crazy is what I learned when I learned about all these library databases is some fields have like their own database. Like psychology has its own database, and so does like even history. But food studies does not have that. So I feel like it's been sort of harder for me, and that's why, you know, I tend to use the library's main one, and my librarian has helped me know, I guess, like, she showed me like this anthropology one that sometimes has been okay, and some other stuff, but I don't, so when I find things, it's often through like references from other articles that I've been assigned, or with the help of my subject librarian, or looking to see if there's something similar to something that I read or kind of vaguely know about through general searching. And then I really read a lot just on my laptop, because for me, I have to do it when I'm like at the library and I can find a quiet spot or at a coffee shop. Once I go home to Queens, it's like all over, like no work is getting done. I have a pet, you know, and a full house. So I really have to do it when I'm like on campus. And I don't take the subway, so I can't read on the subway either. But I read the whole thing.
Other questions for the users? Yeah.
So my question is, do you rely on social media to stay connected with the research community?
Great question. Social media? Anybody?
Definitely, especially in the past few years. where it's really taken off. So, in my lab, we use Google Groups to forum discussions. We also use social media and Facebook for our journal clubs, and as well as just being able to follow the key researchers in my field. It's become vital.
Is it mostly Facebook for you, Beth? Twitter a little bit, or
I dabble in Twitter.
you don't? Just not,
I twabble.
Well done, well done. Jesse, what about you? Social media?
Well, I mentioned I kind of have gotten into Instagram lately,
Yes,
but that's more like, I do post pictures from the community garden I work in, and there are other like local, sort of local agriculture, as much as that exists in the city, people in that space. But I wouldn't call it like research,
Okay.
So I would say that my cohort and we have used social media to keep tabs on some celebrity wizards in the community, but I mostly use it to stay in touch with my long-distance boyfriend.
Excellent. John, yeah.
Hi, I have another question. You said, now think back over the last several months, and was there ever something like, you just been doing this way and then doing this way, and then somebody said, boy, don't you know about this? What was that example?
A game changer.
Yeah, somebody showed, why was I so stupid I kept doing it this other way, and now somebody has told me that, oh, wow, that's the way to do it. What were those examples?
I am that person for most of my friends. That's it.
Definitely Zotero. And it took me a long time to be convinced, because I felt like I had a good system of just, like keeping track of my references, and I would look up in the style manual what to do. But my librarian just kept being like, well, did you try using it yet? Did you try using it yet? And I was almost getting like kind of annoyed, but then I tried it, and she was totally right. So
Nice.
I'm sorry to delve outside of the research realm, but for me, Lyft and other ride-sharing apps have revolutionized my life, especially getting around the area in which I work.
So let's take our masks off and just make sure that we have a few minutes here as we're wrapping up to address any practitioner questions, methodological questions. I think it's we didn't plan this necessarily from the beginning, but we really have three diverse approaches to the method, both the research leading up to a persona, the creation and delivery, and then use of the persona. So questions for the panel about methodology or using personas to make decisions? Yeah.
How much time did you allot to the persona building projects?
Question is, how much time did you allot to building personas? Yeah.
It's, for me, it's hard to estimate, because we had our UCD team who had done kind of the core baseline effort, which was really a lot of work, but I can't kind of quantify that. For our use in this project, it was the time involved in doing 2 full-day workshops plus conducting 200 interviews.
I think ours took us about 3 months probably. I'm estimating, I don't remember exactly how much time, but just in terms of really the most time-consuming thing, I think, was developing our questionnaire instrument that we used to rate the transcripts and assign the XY values. And once we had done that and actually read through the transcripts and coded them, it all went a lot faster. But it was an in-depth research project for us to do it.
So my answer is going to be a little bit different, just because personas were never an explicit goal of the research project. When we do contextual inquiry, it takes 6 months start to finish. There's usually about 20 to 25 participants in a contextual inquiry, and we have multiple researchers who are not necessarily working full-time on the project, who are also working on other projects on the side. I'm happy to talk more extensively about that methodology, but the personas it takes about 3 full days with anywhere between 10 and 20 people in the room to analyze and synthesize the data from a project like that. the personas really sort of started to fall into place when the findings about motivation started to coalesce. And it was just sort of this moment where I said, this is something that we want to share with the company. This is a really important finding, and I think if we can use it to frame the way that we talk about users as, not everyone's Hermione. Sometimes you have to think about Ron when you're designing, which I've actually walked through the Collins building and heard people say. So that's that's a win. That didn't take much time at all, and I don't actually think that the persona creation is, it depends on how in-depth both of your personas are significantly more in-depth than ours, and we borrowed characters, really. So it depends on the goal, because it's time-consuming to develop them. It's time-consuming to collect the data. It's time-consuming to analyze the data. It's time-consuming to share the data in a meaningful way. The persona creation is not the time-consuming part of the project. I will say, though, that when you create the kind of personas that you guys have put so much effort into, that is time-consuming, because you're pulling the data together in a specific way that may not be natural to the way that you analyzed it. And that is, you have to, if I'm going to do personas that way, which I have done, I have to have a guarantee on the other end that the time I spend is going to be worth how they use it. That it's not necessarily just going to be shelved after one project, and I also have to get a guarantee that I'm not going to be the one who has to update them.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think the timing factor is a matter of the ROI of a persona is, I think, around keeping them alive. And the upfront work to create the initial sort of first draft of a persona is probably the hardest. It all depends on what updating you need to do. In my former life at Sage, I would say it took us about 9 months to create a suite of 12 librarian, faculty, and student personas that ended up being about a suite of 25 in the end. But what we used them for was we would take that generic set of personas at the beginning of a development project, and we'd have the product expert and the marketing manager and editorial and whatever other stakeholders in the room, relatively small group, and we'd say, okay, this is the generic version. What questions do we need to ask to make this useful for your project? So business stats project, for example, launching a new platform, we needed to tailor all of those personas to be business faculty, business librarians, business and management students. So we really needed a slightly different adaptation. And that takes a little bit extra time, but it's that base persona that you can work from. I have a question for you all as far as you all at one point expressed some misgiving about the personas that you put together and the projects that you presented. But I'm curious, will you use this method again, do you think, in a future project, in your future work? I think I heard you say, Deirdre, that that's not a high priority for your group at the moment?
I have zero misgivings about my personas or about the project.
Okay, good.
I love these personas, and when I talk to librarians, it always goes over well, and it resonates with what they see in the students that they work with as well. Especially because in Alexa's words, I realized that I used those words while we had our personas on, but so I'm sorry about that. But there's no value judgment assigned to whatever motivation students are bringing to the table.
Yeah.
Personas are, the time-consuming part, the research is going to happen regardless.
Yeah.
Sometimes personas is a requested output. One thing that they've been requested a few times more recently. I'm seeing an uptick in the number of requests for personas. One thing that I like to do is to share the raw data with stakeholders and actually have them create the personas. Because we also do persona-based recruiting. That's a little bit complicated, but I'll try and give you the short version. We talk to stakeholders about who they assume the personas in their audience are, and then we recruit based on those personas. We recruit a couple participants in each category, and then we come back and we say, okay, here are the findings. How off were we in our assumptions about these different personas? Like where is there overlap? Where do we need more of? And then we say, okay, we actually need a lot more of this one persona that we didn't know existed because they're really influential in this community. We need a couple more of these, no more of these. So we use personas loosely in a lot of different ways, but the very demographic, data-heavy personas if that is what a stakeholder wants, I'd like to work with them to create it so that they can, because it's actually personas, customer journey mapping, those kind of deliverables that come out of research findings, actually a lot gets learned about working with the raw data to create them.
Yeah.
So I actually find that they're great as a learning exercise, as a like working with the raw data exercise.
Nice.
I really like that idea about having the stakeholders create the personas. That's really interesting.
Requires buy-in.
Yes.
Well, but
I'm
it
sure.
results in some nice ownership, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I would definitely do it again. I mean, I would try to use them. I mean, we did use them at NYU a little bit when I was still there. I don't know, for me, if do I see it in my work in the future? Again, maybe not, but that's really just a consequence of a shift in my role. Sure. So I also think that what we did was really representative or indicative of a specific moment in time at an institution where we were feeling like the chat service was it was just like the usage of that was just skyrocketing every year.
Yeah.
Like stats, I don't have the stats on me right now, but it was such a busy service. We were like triple staffing it. And so we were just so aware that those transcripts were like gold mines
Totally.
of user pain points
Yep.
and questions and
Yep.
things. And so I think that we're, like in my library right now, we're not in that same situation really. So it's a little bit different. That was such a specific project. That I'm so happy we did.
Yeah.
But I don't know now for me if I will do something like that again or
Okay.
not. But I would, it was fun. I learned a lot. So
It's a really creative
Yeah.
use of that data, I think, and it's such in the moment. That's true
Right.
user experience, right? In the moment.
Right.
Gabe, what about you?
My answer is I don't know.
Okay.
I think we would use it if we could be sure we'd be using it right.
Okay.
So that means having really clear understanding of what you're trying to get out of it, and then making sure we have kind of the buy-in and commitment to really make the most out of the personas.
Yeah.
What I love about your story about personas, though, is actually the creation of the personas and the project that led to it led to you actually just getting user feedback for everything
Yeah.
instead of using personas all the time, which I
Yeah.
think is the ideal.
Yeah.
So sometimes I like to think about personas as kind of a gateway deliverable.
That's a good way to look
User
at it, yeah.
personas, the UX gateway drug. Other questions? We've just got a few more minutes.
Actually, I have a
Please.
question for Alexa. So just now you draw the axis, and then what kind of method did you use to separate those points into four user groups? So how did you cluster?
So that was the k-means cluster analysis was the method, and it's actually totally algorithmic. So it was not us manually drawing the clusters. It was
So you coded the data.
we coded the data and we wrote the instrument. So we created the instrument that we used to give each transcript the XY coordinates. And I will tell you that in my experience publishing in library science journals, this article was like the most, put us through the ringer in terms of the review process because
Wow.
our reviewers were like, what is this? We've never heard of this. And we
Right.
were like, well, we made it up. And they were like, well, why do you think you can publish something that you just made up? And we were like, well, we think we're being really groundbreaking and innovative. We made it up. So it was so, I feel like we got in under the wire, kind of. But yeah, so we did that, and then we did consult with one of the statistical analysis experts in the library at the time about we knew a little bit about clustering, and k-means is one way to do it, and there are other ways to do it. So after consulting with the statistical analysis person, we arrived at the k-means cluster analysis as a good, sound way, and we just sort of put all our data into SPSS and entrusted the algorithm. So
I think it's really creative. Yeah.
Thank
What
you.
was that stat yesterday about novel research not easily?
Yeah, taking a little while.
Yeah,
to
I
get.
think you experienced it. We have time for one more question, if there's anything burning from the audience that you must know. Okay, well, let's thank both our users and our UX experts for their time.